Hi guys, my name is Emily. Welcome to the hashtag DT Project 17, a project in which I read the Dark Tower series for the first time ever. Two disclaimers. One, if I'm saying things that don't make sense based on your knowledge of having read the whole series, that's why. This is my first time reading the series. And two, I don't care about authorial intentions. So my approach to the series is to use my academic interests in fantasy literature as a whole to see how the series fits into the genre. What is subversive about the text? How does the text fall into the fantasy genre, if it does at all? One of the things that I'm also doing is looking at texts that have influenced the series and kind of seeing how those texts shape or inform my reading of the King novels. So for this installment, I read The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, which was a poem written in 1922. It is widely regarded as one of the most important poems to come out of the 20th century. It's very central in terms of modernist poetry. Specifically, what I saw that we could maybe see coming through in The Wasteland by Stephen King is the Kingfisher portion of the Arthurian legend. So the Fisher King is the last person in a long line of people charged with keeping the Holy Grail. The Fisher King has suffered a wound to his leg/groin, depending on the translation you're reading, and so he cannot move on his own and he cannot produce an heir. There's a direct relationship between the king being barren and his land being a barren wasteland. The primary purpose of a man at this time was to propagate his line. So if you're unable to do that, then you cannot fulfill your function as a man. So that is the legend that sort of influences parts of the wasteland potentially. This is where we get into trouble because we have layers upon layers, and that is in fact how the wasteland kind of reads. The wasteland, in my opinion, is an exercise in scholarship. So when you are doing scholarship, you are always trying to find the most primary source. When you read something and you think that's a literary reference to something, you're supposed to go find that text and see what happens there, and then you find out that that's a reference to something else, and you end up going on this quest through literature that is almost impossible to trace this theme or trope or whatever back through literature. And The Wasteland, T.S. Eliot's poem, forces you to do that. If you want to understand, I have the Norton version of the text. If anyone else is working with a Norton anthology, you'll notice that basically every line is footnoted, and they're like, this refers to this, and this refers to this. And of course, if you were to read those pieces in another annotated text, you would find that these are all works that draw on other works, and it's just this sort of endless spiral where no one can ever find the beginning. It's this futile quest, in the same way that the quest for the Holy Grail is futile, in the same way that perhaps the quest for the Dark Tower in King's series is futile, question mark. I don't know where we're going, but that's the feeling I'm kind of getting just based on these other sort of wasted, hopeless quests that we're seeing being brought up. There are different interpretations to The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot. Some people sort of see it as a cultural crisis, the whole breakdown of morals following World War I, which ties us back to the Kingfisher narrative. In many ways, the Kingfisher story of this barren wasteland, this no hope for humanity, for the human line, kind of ties into post-World War mentality and feelings. Like we've created this wasteland, we've sort of ended humanity and the tarnished goodness that we like to think about humanity, because look at the shit that we did to each other. How can we ever come to terms with that? But something else I would like to bring up is a slightly hopeful note. So throughout King's Dark Tower series, we kind of see this push and pull between hope and despair. In tying this book, The Wastelands, back to The Wasteland, which ties back to the Fisher King story, we get this hope. So if we think about literature and narrative being the thing that is propagating itself in the ways that the Fisher King story has passed on its line, and we see little bits of it in The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, which again sort of propagates itself down the line to King's The Wastelands as part of the Dark Tower series. We see this narrative having a branch, having a line. It's not a total wasteland, right? Like, we do see some fruitfulness happening. The story itself, the fact that these elements of the story have propagated and have carried on into other stories, gives us a sort of hopeful sense, perhaps. I thought that was just worth pointing out. I'm not really sure how that will work in the long run, but I think it's interesting how often the Dark Tower series pulls up old stories and brings them into something new, something contemporary and modern and popular. So one line from The Wasteland that I would like to point out is, quote, "What are the roots that clutch? What branches grow out of this stony rubbish?" So again, we're talking about branches that are coming out of the wasteland, branches that are coming out of this perhaps dead space. So we forget about a story for a little while, and then somebody pulls on to one of these little roots or elements of a plant. This metaphor is breaking down. I'm going with it. So if somebody, you know what I mean, like snaps off a bit of this plant and plants it somewhere new, and it grows and it flourishes, we see this carrying over of these narratives. There's something profoundly hopeful about seeing branches of stories that sort of live on. There's also a line in The Wasteland, quote, "And the dead tree gives no shelter." So if we think about books are made of paper, which were once trees, the idea that this literature will not bring you comfort. The dead tree gives you no shelter. This book and its branches of it, this story that is seemingly very negative and hopeless, it's not going to give you shelter. It's not going to give you comfort. It's going to ask you tough questions and make you think about humanity and what it means to go on that journey. And I think we kind of see that in The Wastelands by Stephen King. We see that in the various groups of people who have survived whatever happened before the world moved on, when the world moved on. I wanted to talk about, quote, "Falling towers, Jerusalem, Athens, Alexandria, Vienna, London, unreal." Given that the whole Dark Tower series, there's a focus on a tower, noting that these towers fall, I think, is perhaps key. It links us back to the Fisher King. So a tower is a phallic symbol. Phallic symbol is an indication of masculine power. So when we see this phallic symbol fall, we see sort of a failure of masculinity, very much in the same way that we see the Fisher King has a crisis of masculinity in that he can't reproduce. There are these little nuggets that I've sort of pulled out, and I wanted to note on camera my sort of thoughts and how they might tie into or hint at what will happen in the rest of the Dark Tower series. So let me know in the comments down below, obviously with no spoilers for the rest of the series, your thoughts on The Wasteland and this idea of a failure, of barrenness, of masculinity. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you very soon. Bye.